Okay. Well, good morning or afternoon to those out there. Before we start today, I'd like to do a brief land acknowledgement. While we're on a video call and many of us are joining from different places, we want to remind ourselves that we gather on the unceded land of Indigenous peoples. I am joining in from the so-called Richmond, Virginia, and I'm on the land of the Powhatan and Chickahominy peoples. If you are unsure of whose land you are on and want to find out, you can visit nativeland.ca to find out. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Environmental Justice Now. As we've mentioned in previous episodes, election season is in fact upon us. In fact, next Tuesday, November 8th, is Election Day here in Virginia. So if you have not already, please use your voice to cast your vote on or before Election Day next week. I'm Liam Barlow. I'm the Policy Fellow here at Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. And joining us today to share more about this year's election and why we should all be making voting a priority, and not only this year's election, but every election, is Michelle Moffett, the Data and Technology Manager from the Virginia Civic Engagement Table. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michelle. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
I'm also doing great and very glad to have you on today.
Happy to be here.
And we'll keep this fairly brief this afternoon. But just a few questions to get everyone in the voting mindset ahead of next week's election. So kind of just easing into that, can you just begin by sharing a bit more about this year's election? What is on the ballot and what is on the ballot?
Yeah, so this is a midterm year, meaning here in Virginia, at the top of our ticket are going to be congressional races. And then depending on your locality, you might have some town or city council races. And there are some school board races as well taking place in Chesapeake, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and Loudoun counties.
That's great and very succinct. So just to be clear, that means everyone in Virginia has something on their ballot to vote for this year.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Good for everyone to know. Kind of continuing with that theme, and we've worked together on elections in the past, and we've sort of seen the different environments that come in different places in Virginia. So what are some of the difficulties and inequities that you've noticed in your voter outreach efforts?
Yeah, so I think as we've approached those this year, our main focus has been voter education, and we think of that in a couple different ways. So one, as of July 1, 2020, Virginia's voting laws changed in making voting a lot easier and more accessible for a lot of people across Virginia. And two, as we know, last year, Virginia went through a very long redistricting process. So that means a couple things. One, new voting laws. We are still very much adjusting to being able to vote by mail in Virginia. Whereas before, we could only vote if we met one of 8 or 10 criteria for voting absentee. So that has not become instinctual for most of us here in Virginia. And another new thing that takes effect this year is same-day voter registration, which is something other states have had, like BBM, but is very new to Virginia. So folks who were not registered by the deadline back in October, they can go to their polling place on election day, fill out an identity confirmation sheet, and then they'll receive a provisional ballot. And that provisional ballot will come with a green sheet of instructions that they must follow to cast for that vote to be cast. And then going back to redistricting, I think a lot of people are not aware that they might be in a new congressional district. They're certainly they might be in a new state leg district, looking forward to next year. And some people might even have new precincts, and those precinct names might have changed. So I think it's a lot all at once for Virginians to adjust to. And, we get in the habit of the old reliable precinct name, polling place, whatever. And without realizing sometimes that every 10 years that is going to change. And these are the first elections this year in the new districts. And then going back to old voting laws in Virginia, one thing I think people have not really adjusted to yet is that a photo ID is no longer required. And that's something that we really try to focus on when we talk to historically marginalized communities and just increase that voter education and voter awareness out there, because a lot of people just don't have a photo ID, but they also don't realize that they can take something like a utility bill and go to vote at their polling place on election day. And like I said, with same day voter registration or SDR, like if you go and you don't have one of those valid forms of voter ID, you can get one of those ID confirmation sheets as well and fill it out and be able to cast a provisional ballot once they are able to verify. Once you complete that and they're able to verify your information.
That's all very good information. I can definitely speak just from having worked a few election cycles myself that the changes every year, even the good changes, could be a lot to implement and a lot to inform voters of. And certainly in the long term, it'll be great. But, in that first election, it's quite a challenge to make sure voters are well informed. And I know a big piece of that, at least one that I've worked on before, I know you have as well, is students in Virginia can use their student IDs as a form of ID to vote. And that's really important for college students all across Virginia as they get ready to vote next week as well.
Yeah, and that's something that, you and I have both focused on previously. But, I think with these new voting laws, it does also empower the student population across Virginia, because a lot of these people, a lot of the students, they move from home and go to a university in Virginia. And while that's not going to be their permanent address, it's also where they spend 9 out of 12 months of the year. And if they choose to do so, they can have their vote and their voice counted there. And, to advocate for themselves and for their classmates and for the professors. So, all of this to say that it has become easier and more accessible in Virginia. And we need to make sure as many people as possible are aware of that.
That's good. And that's the important work both of us are attempting to do every day. But very important information. Yeah. Kind of going off of that, we've talked about all the structural difficulties, for people to vote, but also, some of the more, I guess, societal difficulties. I wanted to see what you thought about all the frustration that many are feeling related to the ineffectiveness of voting and the failure of our democracy. And what do you think people deciding not to what do you say to people deciding not to head to the polls this year because of those feelings? And how should we respond, from our positions?
Yeah, I want to start by saying that it is easy to feel demotivated. And I don't want to push those feelings aside or say they're invalid. These past 6 or 7 years in the US have been chaotic, disheartening, and at times, terrifying. We've lost over 1 million people to COVID, and we're still living through this mass casualty, mass disabling event. And a lot of those protections, financial protections particularly, that were instituted at the start of COVID are no longer there. And I just want to acknowledge and speak to that, hey, it is a very difficult time to be a human in the world. And, voicing those frustrations does not make you a bad person. They're totally valid. And we're all going through it and experiencing it one way or another. Another frustration we've come across, though, this year is with the new Department of Elections. Some localities, some in Southwest and some in Nova, received on their voter information card the wrong polling place. So that misinformation is something that we've been trying to combat and sending out correction texts and just making sure, like I said earlier, as we adjust to these new precincts, new districts, that everybody is informed and has the proper information that they need to go and cast that ballot. And I also want to highlight that, with all these frustrations, and again, believe me, I get it, that voting is still important. It won't change things overnight, though I think we need to think about what we owe to ourselves and what we owe to each other. And what I mean when I say that is we deserve a living wage. We deserve free pre-K and college. We deserve a habitable planet. And we deserve reproductive justice and rights as well. Voting will not magically change that overnight, but this year's election can be a referendum on the things we see and hear on a daily basis, but enough of us have to show up to make it so. Our democracy is still at stake. We have seen this time and time again. No matter what that loud minority says, we also need to make sure that people are aware that elections in Virginia are free and fair, safe and secure. So highlight that, and keeping in mind that voting is the most effective way to make your voice heard, but going back to what we owe each other, also build that power within your community. And another thing I want to speak to there are local elections. I mentioned 4 localities at the start of this who are having those school board elections. And we have all watched as people have stormed these school board meetings and advocated for banning books, are rewriting history because our history and our original sin make them extremely uncomfortable, and they don't want their children exposed to that. Our children deserve an equitable education. They deserve an honest education. And the folks on school boards are often the first, or not often, but they are the first line of defense there. So it's not just advocating for each other as adults experiencing all the hardships we are, but it's also for the people in the children in our education system now. At the very least, that's what they deserve from us. And we need to make sure that we stand up and advocate for them.
I couldn't agree more. And I know I can speak from, living part-time in Hampton Roads, that, the ads are nonstop on television, reminding you that there is a very important race on the ballot.
Yes.
But you may not have those ads reminding you in Southwest Virginia or in the Valley or anywhere else that there is just as important elections on your ballot this year as well.
Yeah.
So there is something for everyone in Virginia this year. And I can also say from our perspective at VAIPL, their environmental issues are on the ballot locally just as much as they are at the congressional level as well.
And that's another thing our children deserve from us, is a habitable planet. So,
yes, it is. It's imperative. And you've spoken to quite a few of these things already. So if you don't have much else to add on this, it's fine, but I'll just leave it out there for you.
Yeah.
Are there any voting resources that you would like to share? And is there anything new this year that voters may not know about?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, the two new things are going to be SDR, or same day voter registration. And I want to emphasize for that it is an easy process. You'll go and you'll fill out an application, and you can cast a provisional ballot after signing the application, and also the statement, the confirmation of ID. And then make sure to follow those instructions you get on the green sheet that you'll receive when you get your provisional ballot, because that must be completed for that vote to be cast. And then going back to resources people can use, again, people are going to be new precincts, new districts, new congressional districts, state ledge districts. And here in Virginia, we are incredibly blessed to have VPAP, or the Virginia Public Access Project, as a resource. It's vpap.org. And the people there do great work and deserve all the praise. But I would encourage anybody who's unsure about where to vote or what district they now fall into to go to VPAP and find out that information, so that they can turn out to the polls fully empowered and knowing what they're walking into.
I couldn't agree more with that. I believe I saw the statistic was that over 2 million Virginians are in a new congressional district this year. That is an incredible amount of people. And I know I'm one of them who is in a new district. And in many cases, that might mean you are living in a significantly more competitive district than you've lived in before. Meaning your vote means a lot this year as they prepare to go to the polls next week. I'll also just kind of highlight along this that a lot of Virginians have already cast their ballot, have voted early, have already returned their mail ballots. And just to add on to that, it's not too late. Your mail ballots will be counted up to 3 business days after the election. So for those of you who are concerned about that, you can mail in your ballots at this time. And early voting continues through this coming Saturday in all counties across Virginia.
Those ballots have to be postmarked by Election Day, but as long as they are received by your local registrar by noon on Friday, they will still be counted. And they're on the citizen portal for the Department of Elections. There's a absentee ballot tracker that you can go in and see the progress or the status of your ballot and do any follow-up that is applicable.
That's another good reminder. And it's really nice that one of the changes in recent years now is that ballots are still counted a few days after the election. I know that was a struggle just in the years since I've been working on campaigns, where you realize once 2 or 3 days before the elections come, it's too late to ask someone to return their ballot by mail. And that just creates a whole other headache, for voters and for organizers both.
Yep.
So I'm very glad to see those changes have been implemented in recent years. But this was all very informative, covered a lot of ground. I think gave a lot of reminders for why people should vote, how they're able to vote, and made this process about as simple as it can be ahead of Tuesday's election. Yep. And again, there's still 5 days or so left to fill in your mail ballots, to go vote early or vote on election day. Plenty of time to take lessons away from this interview. But again, thank you so much, Michelle, for coming. It's always good to see you. And this was all very good information. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I just want to say thank you for having me. And this is a lot of information, very quick. I hope you found it useful and not boring. So again, really appreciate the opportunity to be on here and advocate for the people of Virginia and the voters of Virginia.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
You too. Thank you.